When people talk about family, they often speak about love, about unity, about the comfort of knowing you'll never be alone. For the longest time, I believed that too. I believed that if you gave your best to your family, if you were patient, forgiving, and kind, they would always remember you with warmth. But life has a quiet way of teaching lessons you never asked to learn. My name is Linda, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Seattle. For most of my life, I was the kind of woman who believed in doing everything with love, even when that love wasn't returned. I was a wife for over 30 years, a mother to one son, and more recently, a mother-in-law. That word, mother-in-law, it sounds so formal, doesn't it? But I always dreamed of being the kind who felt more like a second mother, someone her daughter-in-law could rely on, talk to, laugh with. When my son Ethan got married to Sophie, I was genuinely happy. I remember standing at their wedding, tears in my eyes, heart full, thinking, my boy has found someone who truly loves him. I prayed quietly that night, asking God to bless their home with peace, respect, and love. And for a while, everything seemed perfect. We'd have Sunday dinners together. I'd cook roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Sophie's favorite lemon pie. They'd sit across the table, holding hands, telling me about their week, the new apartment, their jobs, their little plans for the future. I used to sit there, smiling, feeling proud that I had raised a good man. But slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't notice, something began to change. It started with small things. Missed calls, postponed dinners, a text saying, "Sorry, Mom, this weekend's too busy." At first, I told myself, they're just adjusting. Marriage is new. Life gets hectic. But then those small moments became a pattern. I'd wait for them on Sundays, table set, candles lit, and the phone would buzz an hour later saying, "Sorry, maybe next week." I'd look at the empty plates, the untouched food, and whisper to myself, "It's okay, they're just tired." I was always quick to excuse them, just like I always had for everyone I loved. And then one day, Sophie stopped calling me Mom. She started calling me Linda. At first, I laughed it off. "Oh, you're getting formal now," I teased. She smiled politely. "It just feels more natural." Something in her tone stung, but I didn't show it, because I was raised to keep peace, to stay kind even when it hurt. When Ethan and Sophie bought their new home, I was the first one to show up with flowers and a big smile. They seemed uncomfortable. Sophie kept glancing at Ethan as if asking him to say something. I could feel it, that quiet tension hanging in the air like a cloud. After a few minutes of small talk, Ethan finally said, "Mom, we just want a little space, you know? We're trying to figure things out as a couple." I smiled, or tried to. "Of course, sweetheart, I understand." But inside, something cracked. It wasn't that I wanted to interfere. I just wanted to be there, the way I always had been. I wanted to cook for them, drop by with groceries, bring the comfort of home to their new place. But suddenly, all those small gestures, the things that used to make them smile, started to feel like intrusions. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet. My husband, Mark, was asleep in the next room. And for the first time in a long while, I realized how lonely I felt. I whispered to myself, I was always there for them, so why does it feel like no one's here for me now? The answer didn't come that night. In fact, it wouldn't come for a long time. But that was the beginning. The first time I truly felt the weight of my own kindness. The kind of kindness that people mistake for weakness. When I think back to the early years of my life with Mark, things were simple. We didn't have much, just a tiny one-bedroom apartment and a hand-me-down sofa that squeaked every time you sat on it. But we had dreams. We had late-night talks about our future, about the kind of home we'd build, about how we wanted to raise our children differently from how we were raised. Mark was never the most expressive man, but he was steady. He worked hard, came home tired, and would often sit at the dinner table just listening to me talk about my day. I loved that about him, his quiet presence. I never needed grand gestures, just the sense that we were building something together. When Ethan was born, my whole world changed. I remember holding him for the first time, tiny fingers, soft cries, and thinking, this is it. This is what life is meant to feel like. I didn't care how tired I was or how tight the bills were that month. All I wanted was to give him everything I never had. Mark and I didn't have help. My parents were back in Ohio and his were long gone, so it was mostly me, figuring things out one day at a time. There were days when I'd wake up before sunrise to pack his lunch, get Ethan ready for school, go to work, then come home to make dinner. I used to joke that my feet never stopped moving from dawn till midnight. But I didn't mind. That's the thing about mothers. When you love, you don't count the cost. You just give. Ethan was a good kid. Kind, gentle, smart. He'd draw little cards for me on Mother's Day that said things like, "You're the best mom ever." I kept every single one of them, even now, tucked away in a small box in my closet. As he grew older, I started noticing pieces of Mark in him, the way he'd stay quiet when something bothered him, the way he'd take responsibility for others. Sometimes I'd watch the two of them together, father and son, and feel a warmth in my heart that words can't describe. We had our share of struggles too. Mark's job wasn't always stable, and there were months when I had to pick up extra shifts at the nursing home where I worked. I'd come home exhausted, my back aching, but the moment Ethan would run to me saying, "Mom, look what I made," all that tiredness melted away. Our little home slowly turned into something beautiful. Not fancy, but full of love. Pictures on the walls, Ethan's drawings on the fridge, the smell of coffee and pancakes on Sunday mornings. When Ethan went off to college, the house suddenly felt too quiet. I used to wander into his room, sit on the edge of his bed, and just look around. The baseball trophies, the books, the photo of him with his friends at the lake. That silence, it had a weight to it. But I told myself that's what parenting is. Raising someone strong enough to go out into the world, even if it means you'll be left standing at the doorway waving goodbye. Mark didn't say much during those years. He never really knew how to express emotions. He loved me in his own quiet way, fixing things around the house, making sure the car was serviced, asking if I'd eaten. But sometimes I wished he'd just sit down and ask me how I was doing. I think that's what happens in long marriages. You stop talking about feelings because you assume the other person already knows. And before you realize it, years pass, and you're living side by side, partners in routine, not conversation. Then Ethan met Sophie. She was polite, smart, and carried herself with the confidence I never had at her age. When he first brought her home for dinner, I remember setting the table with my best china. She smiled, complimented the food, and even helped me wash the dishes after. I thought, she's perfect for him. That night, after they left, I told Mark
She's gonna fit in right in. I can feel it. Mark nodded, his usual quiet approval. She seems nice, he said. When Ethan told me a year later that he was going to propose, I cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come from pride and nostalgia all at once. My little boy was becoming someone's husband. It felt surreal. The wedding was beautiful, small, intimate, in a garden just outside the city. I wore a soft blue dress that Ethan helped me pick. Sophie looked stunning in her white gown. When the vows were read, I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of gratitude, like all the struggles, all the sacrifices had finally led to this moment. For a while after that, I was part of their new life. They'd come over every Sunday, sometimes stay for the night. I'd cook their favorite meals, and we'd watch old movies together. I'd see them laughing, teasing each other, and my heart would swell with joy. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. It wasn't sudden, it was quiet, almost invisible at first. Sophie started answering my calls less frequently. Ethan, who used to call me every evening, started saying, "Sorry, Mom, I'll call you tomorrow." One day, I dropped by their apartment unannounced, something I had always done when Ethan was single, and Sophie opened the door with a startled look. "Oh, hi, Linda?" Linda, not Mom. That was the first time she used my name like that. Ethan came to the door a moment later, his expression caught between guilt and discomfort. He said, "We were just heading out." "Oh," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just brought some lasagna for both of you." They thanked me politely, and I left. I remember walking back to my car that day, feeling something sink inside me, something heavy, something wordless. It was the beginning of distance, not physical distance, but the kind that grows between hearts when one side keeps giving and the other starts closing its doors. I still tried. Birthdays, holidays, random check-ins. But no matter how much I reached out, they seemed to drift further away. And then came the day they moved into their new home, the one I mentioned before. I had helped Ethan with the down payment, though he never asked. I just wanted to give him a head start, the way any mother would. I remember telling Mark, this is what we worked for, to see him settled and happy. Mark smiled faintly. "You did good, Linda," he said. But when I visited their new home for the first time, that faint sense of belonging I'd always felt, it wasn't there anymore. Sophie looked uneasy, and Ethan spoke to me like a guest, polite, distant, rehearsed. And when he said those words, "We just want a little space," I nodded, pretending I understood. But deep down, I knew something had changed forever. That night, when I told Mark what happened, he just sighed. "Maybe you're overthinking it," he said. But I wasn't. A mother knows when love starts to fade, not because it disappears suddenly, but because it slowly stops coming back the same way it used to. Still, I kept showing up, because that's who I was, the woman who stayed kind, even when kindness started to hurt. After that evening at their new house, things were never quite the same. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that Ethan and Sophie were newly married, trying to build their own rhythm. I told myself, give them time, Linda. They'll come around. But deep down, I felt it. That quiet ache that comes when something dear starts slipping away from your hands. Weeks turned into months. I'd still call Ethan once or twice a week, and sometimes he'd answer. Sometimes he wouldn't. When he did, his tone was polite, but it felt rushed, like he was talking to someone he needed to, not someone he wanted to. "How are you doing, Mom?" he'd ask. "I'm fine," I'd reply, trying to keep my voice light. "Just made your favorite pie yesterday." Wish you were here. That sounds great, Mom. Maybe next weekend, okay? But next weekend rarely came. Sundays used to be my favorite day. The day we'd all gather, eat together, laugh together. Now Sundays felt heavy. I'd wake up, cook out of habit, and then realize there was no one coming. The house would fill with the smell of food, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, but it all felt meaningless. Even Mark started asking, "Why do you still cook so much?" And I'd answer softly, "Because it makes the house feel alive." He didn't say anything after that. He just nodded and turned on the TV, as if that silence was easier to live with. One evening, after another missed call, I sat by the kitchen window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Seattle rain has this sound, soft but endless. It makes you think. It makes you remember. And that night, I thought about all the years I had spent caring, how every part of my life had been centered around making sure everyone else was okay. I wondered if anyone ever stopped to ask if I was okay. A few weeks later, I decided to visit Ethan and Sophie again. I didn't call ahead this time. Maybe part of me wanted to surprise them, to remind them I still existed in their world. When I pulled up to their driveway, I noticed another car parked there, a sleek black SUV. I hesitated for a moment, then walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Sophie opened it, her expression caught somewhere between shock and discomfort. "Oh, hi, Linda," she said, her voice polite but cold. "We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said with a smile. "I just thought I'd drop by. I made some lasagna." She looked over her shoulder before replying. "Ethan's busy with a few guests right now. Maybe I can take it inside for you?" Guests. The word stung a little, though I didn't show it. I could hear laughter coming from the living room, voices I didn't recognize. "Oh, that's fine," I said softly. "I don't want to interrupt." I handed her the dish, trying to keep my hands from trembling. Sophie took it with a strained smile. "Thanks, Linda. That's really thoughtful." As I turned to leave, I heard Ethan's voice from inside. "Who was it?" "Your mom," Sophie answered quietly. There was a pause. "Oh, did she say anything?" "No, she just brought food." "Okay." And then silence. That silence broke something inside me. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long while before driving off. The rain had stopped, but my eyes burned as if it hadn't. That night, Mark found me sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. "What happened?" he asked. I shook my head. "Nothing. I just feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore." He sighed. "Linda, you're taking this too personally. Kids grow up, they move on." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But it wasn't just about growing up. It was about being forgotten while still being alive. In the following months, Sophie became more distant. Whenever we met, at birthdays or family gatherings, she kept conversation short. She'd smile politely, but her eyes always looked somewhere else. One Thanksgiving, I decided to host dinner again. I cleaned the house, decorated it with autumn leaves, baked pies, and even made Sophie's favorite salad. I wanted that evening to feel like old times. They arrived late. Sophie greeted me with a hug that felt more like an obligation. Ethan looked tired, distracted. During dinner, they both kept checking their phones. "So," I said, trying to start a conversation, "how's work going for you both?" "Busy," Sophie replied, not looking up. "We're thinking about moving closer to my parents, actually. It's easier for my commute." I froze for a moment, forcing a smile. "Oh, That's, nice. Mark looked at me quietly, sensing the pain behind my voice. The rest of the meal went by in silence. When they finally left, I stood by the door waving goodbye, my hand trembling. As soon as the car drove away, I turned off the lights and sat on the couch in the dark. That night, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Love doesn't always fade with anger. Sometimes it fades with indifference. A few weeks later, Ethan called. "Mom," he said, "Sophie and I have been thinking maybe it's best if you don't drop by unannounced anymore." I didn't speak for a moment. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. He continued, "It just makes Sophie uncomfortable. She feels like she doesn't have her own space." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. After everything I had done, every meal, every gift, every ounce of love, I was being told I wasn't welcome. "I understand," I finally said quietly. There was a pause. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand." He said it like it was nothing, like those words hadn't just shattered me. When I hung up, I stared at the phone in disbelief. Then slowly, I placed it on the table and whispered to myself, I was always there for them until they turned their backs on me. That night, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I had no tears left. It was the night I realized that kindness, when unappreciated, becomes a silent burden. And I carried that burden alone. The day after that phone call, I woke up before dawn. The house was still, the air heavy with silence. For years, my mornings had always been the same. Coffee brewing, soft music playing, me standing by the kitchen counter planning my day. But that morning, I just sat there, staring into my cup, unable to taste or move. It's strange how a few words can change everything. The sound of Ethan's voice, so calm, so distant, kept replaying in my head. Maybe it's best if you don't drop by unannounced anymore. There was no anger in his tone, no harshness, and somehow that made it worse. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Had I smothered them? Was I too present, too available, too eager to help? I thought kindness was a blessing, but maybe to them it had become a burden. Mark left early for work that day. He didn't say much, just his usual quiet, "Don't wait up for me." I watched him walk out the door, the same door we'd walked through together for 30 years. It hit me then. How much of my life had been spent waiting for other people, for their calls, for their visits, for their love. By mid-morning, I decided to take a drive. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move. The Seattle sky was gray, the kind of gray that feels like it's sitting right on your shoulders. I drove through the familiar streets, past Ethan's old school, the park where he learned to ride his bike, the diner where Mark and I used to go on Friday nights. Every corner held a memory. Every memory felt like a ghost. I ended up at the lake, the one Ethan loved as a child. We used to come here during the summers. He'd run to the water's edge with his toy boat while I sat under the shade of a tree, watching him laugh. That laughter used to be the soundtrack of my life. Now, all I could hear was the wind and the faint sound of waves brushing against the shore. I sat there for a long time. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to really feel the loneliness that had been growing inside me. People think loneliness comes when you're alone. But the truth is, it comes when you're surrounded by people who stop seeing you. That evening when I got home, Mark was sitting in the living room watching TV. He looked up briefly and asked, Everything okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just went for a drive." He didn't ask more. He never did. A few days later, Ethan called again, this time about something practical. "Mom, Sophie's thinking about starting her own business. She's been a little stressed lately, so if she seems distant, don't take it personally." I smiled faintly at the irony. "I understand," I said. "I always understood. That was my problem." As the weeks passed, I started hearing from them less and less. Even on my birthday that year, Ethan didn't call. He sent a message, "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you have a great day." No call, no visit, just words on a screen. That night, I made myself a small dinner, just soup and toast. I sat at the table alone, the candle flickering softly beside me. And for the first time, I didn't set a second plate. There was no one coming. After dinner, I walked into Ethan's old room. It still smelled faintly of the past: books, laundry soap, and boyhood. On his desk, there was a photo frame: Ethan, me, and Mark on his high school graduation day. We were all smiling. I ran my fingers over the glass, and for a moment, it felt like touching another lifetime. Then the tears came. Not loud, dramatic ones, just quiet, heavy tears that slid down without asking. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Where did we go wrong?" The next morning, I woke up feeling numb. I decided to visit a nearby cafe, the one I used to go to before life became too busy. As I stood in line for coffee, I noticed a woman around my age sitting near the window smiling as she talked to someone on the phone. She was saying, "Yes, honey, I'll be there tomorrow. I'll bake your favorite cake." Her voice was full of love, full of life. I felt something twist inside me. That used to be me. That used to be my life. When I got home, I found Mark in the living room reading the paper. I sat down across from him and said quietly, "Mark, do you ever feel like we're invisible?" He looked up, confused. "Invisible?" "Yes. Like we spent our whole lives giving everything to our family, and now there's nothing left for us." He sighed, folded his paper, and said, "Linda, people move on. That's just life." "But does moving on mean forgetting?" He didn't answer. He turned away as if not knowing was easier than facing it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, "That's just life." Maybe it was, but it didn't feel fair. A few days later, Sophie called unexpectedly. Her tone was polite but sharp. "Linda, I wanted to ask you something. Could you please not call Ethan during work hours? It distracts him." I was silent for a moment. "Oh, I didn't realize I was bothering him," I said softly. She replied, "It's just, he's under a lot of pressure right now. I'm sure you understand." I wanted to scream, "Of course I understand." I understood everything. Too much, maybe. But instead I said, "Sure, dear, I won't." After the call ended, I sat in the kitchen holding the phone, my hands trembling. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. And that's when it truly sunk in. I wasn't part of their family anymore. I was an obligation. That night, when Mark came home, I told him what happened. He put down his keys and looked at me, his face weary. He said, "Linda, you need to stop letting this hurt you so much. You've done your part. Let them live their life." I looked at him and asked, "What about mine, Mark? What's left of it?" He didn't have an answer. He turned away, as if not knowing was easier than facing it. That was the night everything inside me shifted. I realized I had spent my whole life being there for others, waiting for appreciation, waiting for love, waiting for someone to see me the way I saw them. But no one ever did. So I decided to stop waiting. The next morning, I took out a small suitcase. I packed a few clothes, some books, and an old photo album. Mark walked into the room, confused. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to visit my cousin in Oregon for a while," I said. He frowned. "You've never been away from home this long." "I know," I replied quietly. "Maybe it's time I learn how to be." He didn't stop me. He just nodded, almost relieved to avoid the conversation. As I drove away that morning, I felt a strange mix of grief and freedom. I didn't know if I was running away or finally finding myself. Maybe a little of both. The road stretched ahead of me, endless and unfamiliar. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who needed me. I was thinking about who I needed to become.
That was the turning point. The quiet realization that I had spent too many years loving people who only turned toward me when it was convenient. And now I needed to learn to turn toward myself. The drive to Oregon took almost 5 hours. It was early spring, the kind of morning when the sky feels open and endless, and every mile seems to whisper, "Keep going." I hadn't been on a trip alone in decades. When I finally reached my cousin Martha's place, she opened the door with the same warmth she always had. "Linda," she gasped, pulling me into a hug. "You look exhausted." "I guess I am," I said with a weak smile. "A little tired and a little lost." She didn't ask for details. She just said, "You're home for as long as you need to be." The first few days felt strange, quiet, unfamiliar. I wasn't rushing to answer anyone's calls, cook dinners that went unappreciated, or wait for a knock that never came. Instead, I found myself sitting on Martha's porch, watching the sunset bleed into the trees, realizing how long it had been since I just existed for myself. Martha ran a small flower shop in town, and one morning she asked if I'd like to help her. I hesitated at first. "I don't know anything about flowers." She smiled. "You know about care and patience. That's all flowers really need." So I went with her. The first time I touched the petals of a fresh lily, something inside me softened. There was something peaceful about it, arranging, trimming, nurturing beauty that asked for nothing in return. No expectations, no judgment. Just quiet, simple life. Weeks passed, and I began to feel lighter. I started walking in the mornings, just me, the wind, and the sound of the river nearby. Sometimes I'd stop by a small cafe afterward, sit by the window with a book, and watch people come and go. I'd see mothers with children, couples laughing, old friends catching up, life moving forward. And instead of feeling left out, I started to feel grateful that I could still witness it. One evening, Martha and I were sitting by the fireplace when she said, "Linda, you've always given love like it's endless, but maybe it's time to give some of it to yourself." Her words stayed with me all night. For so long, I had tied my worth to being needed, to being the one who showed up. But for the first time, I realized that love didn't have to cost me my peace. A few weeks later, Ethan called. It was unexpected. His voice sounded different, heavier somehow. "Mom," he said quietly, "I heard you went to Oregon. Are you okay?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm okay, Ethan," I said gently. "Just taking some time to breathe." There was a pause. Then he sighed.
Sophie told me what she said to you. She shouldn't have. I'm sorry. The apology caught me off guard. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Ethan, I said softly, I don't want you to feel guilty. I just needed space to remember who I am outside of being someone's mother or someone's wife. He didn't say anything for a moment, then whispered, I understand. Before we hung up, he said, Mom, I miss you. I smiled through quiet tears. I miss you too, honey. After the call, I sat by the window, the same way I used to when waiting for his visits, but this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was just at peace. Over the next few months, Ethan called more often. Sometimes Sophie joined the call too, her voice softer than before. They began to ask how I was doing, not out of duty, but genuine care. When I finally returned to Seattle that summer, the house didn't feel quite as empty. Mark greeted me with a faint smile, one I hadn't seen in years. You look different. Happier. Maybe I am, I replied. He nodded, quietly thoughtful. I missed you, you know. I smiled. I missed myself too. That night, I unpacked slowly, ticking out the few clothes I'd brought, the books I'd read, and the memories I'd gathered. It felt like I was moving into my own life again, not as someone's mother or wife or caretaker, but as me. I started volunteering part-time at a local library, helping children read, guiding seniors to books they'd enjoy. It gave me purpose again, a quiet kind of joy. Sometimes Ethan and Sophie would drop by with the baby. The first time Sophie handed her to me, she said softly, You were right, Linda. Motherhood is harder than it looks. Thank you for always trying. I smiled, my heart swelling with forgiveness I didn't even know I had left. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Love doesn't always need explanations. Sometimes it just needs a chance to breathe again. I learned something in those months away. Being kind isn't weakness, but giving your kindness to people who can't see its worth, that's what breaks you. Now, I choose differently. I still love deeply, but I also protect my peace. I still give, but not until I'm empty. And when I look in the mirror now, I finally see someone I used to overlook. Myself. And for the first time in a long, long while, that's enough.
There's a certain peace that comes when you stop expecting people to be who they used to be. For years, I held on to an image of my family, the one where everyone smiled across the dinner table, where laughter filled the house and love felt simple. But life changes, and people change with it. For a long time, I thought it was my fault, that maybe I gave too much, that maybe my kindness somehow invited people to take advantage. But now I understand something I wish I'd known sooner. Being kind doesn't mean being blind. Kindness should never come at the cost of your self-respect. It should never mean silencing your own needs just to keep others comfortable. Real love, the kind that lasts, it grows stronger when there are boundaries, honesty, and mutual care. When I think about Ethan and Sophie now, I don't feel anger. There's a softness in my heart, the kind that only comes after forgiveness. They're still learning how to love, just as I am still learning how to let go. Sometimes I visit them on weekends now. Sophie makes tea, Ethan tells stories, and the baby, sweet little Emma, crawls into my lap like she's known me forever. It's not perfect, but it's real. And I've learned to appreciate real, even when it's quiet, even when it's small. I often sit by my window at night, looking out at the streetlights and thinking about the version of myself that once cried over unanswered calls and unopened doors. I wish I could tell her, "You were never weak for loving deeply. You were never foolish for caring too much. You just forgot that you deserved that same love in return." And maybe that's the lesson life wanted me to learn all along. That kindness isn't about giving endlessly. It's about choosing wisely. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. You can be soft and still strong. You can forgive without forgetting who you are. And you can love people without losing yourself in the process. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is simply walk away, not out of anger, but out of peace. Today, I live quietly. I read more, I take walks, I visit the flower shop whenever I can. I've learned to find joy in simple moments: a morning coffee, the sound of rain, the feeling of sunlight on my hands. And when I think about the woman I used to be, the one who waited endlessly for others to see her worth, I smile and whisper, "You made it." Because in the end, I did. I made it through the silence, the heartbreak, and the loneliness, and found myself waiting on the other side. And now, when people ask me what happened, how I kept my heart open despite everything, I just say, I was always there for them until I learned to finally be there for me.